Hello you, I'm Jordan. Welcome back to the Filmmakers That Inspire Us. Now, if you haven't seen this show before, what are you doing? We've already done quite a number of celebrities and popular filmmakers. And also, if you haven't seen this series before, as I just stated, this is the series where we document the life, career and legacy of some of our favourite filmmakers. In the last episode, we took a look at Steven Spielberg. And in this thrilling instalment, to celebrate the release of The Odyssey, we'll be taking a look at the life and career of Christopher Nolan. Now, come with me as we walk through his entire life, and you learn something. Let's go.
Chapter 1. Origins of a Visionary. Christopher Nolan's story begins in London in 1970, where he was born the second of three sons to a British advertising executive and an American teacher. Raised between England and Chicago, Nolan grew up straddling two worlds, absorbing the traditions and perspectives of both cultures. Even within his own family, that divide was unmistakable. Christopher's unmistakable British cadence stood in contrast to the all-American voice of his younger brother Jonathan, who would one day become his closest creative partner. It was a childhood shaped by movement, imagination, and two very different ways of seeing the world qualities that would later define Nolan's filmmaking career. At just 7 years old, everything changed. A trip to the cinema to watch George Lucas's Star Wars ignited a spark that would never fade. Captivated by limitless possibilities of the screen, Nolan rushed home and began creating his own worlds with his father's Super 8 camera, painstakingly bringing toys and miniature figures to life through stop-motion animation. Long before Hollywood knew his name, he was already learning the language of cinema, one frame at a time, driven by obsession with stories that could transport audiences beyond reality. Determined to pursue that passion, Nolan enrolled at University College in London, choosing to study English literature because the university offered no film programme. Rather than seeing this as a setback, he forged his own education alongside fellow student Emma Thomas, his future wife and lifelong production partner. He founded the University Film Society, spending countless hours screening films, experimenting with filmmaking and studying the masters. The works of Stanley Kubrick, Ridley Scott, Orson Welles and Michael Mann. More than inspiration, they became the blueprint for a filmmaker determined to redefine modern cinema, which of course he did. By the age of 19, Nolan had completed his first short film, Tarantella, followed by La Cinia, which screened at the Cambridge Film Festival. Yet, success did not arrive overnight. For years he worked in relatively obscurity, directing corporate and industrial films, while repeatedly facing rejection from film funding organisations. But every refusal only strengthened his resolve. Inspired by the fearless independent filmmakers of the 1990s, Nolan made a decision that would change his life forever. If no one would give him the opportunity to make a film, he would create one himself. From that moment forward, the path was no longer about waiting for permission. Freshly married in 1997, Christopher Nolan and Emma Thomas took another step forward, building the creative partnership. Together, they produced Doodlebug, Nolan's third short film and the earliest of his publicly available works. Running just 3 minutes, the film stars Jeremy Theobald, whose compelling performance would soon earn him a lead role in the debut feature Following. Though modest in scale, Doodlebug offered the first unmistakable glimpse of Nolan's unique cinematic voice. Shot on gritty 16mm black and white film, the short transforms a cramped apartment into a tense psychological battleground. The restless camera, stark lighting and restless pacing created an atmosphere of mounting paranoia as a desperate man relentlessly pursues what appears to be a tiny insect crawling across the floor. Then comes the twist. The bug is revealed to be a miniature version of the man himself, a clever visual revelation that perfectly encapsulates Nolan's fascination with identity and fractured reality. In just a few minutes, Doodlebug introduces themes and storytelling that would become hallmarks of his career. From deceptive narratives to inventive practical effects, it is a small film with enormous significance, offering the first glimpse to the filmmaker who would go on to reshape modern cinema. Sometimes the greatest stories are born from the most unexpected moments. While making Doodlebug, Christopher Nolan became the victim of a burglary. Rather than dwelling on what had been stolen, he found himself fascinated by the burglar's perspective. What did they think as they searched for a stranger's belongings? What kind of life could they reconstruct from scattered possessions? Those questions became the foundation of the following, Nolan's first feature film. Determined not to depend on reluctant film institutions for support, he financed the project himself, shooting on weekends with friends and family, serving as cast and crew. Filmed over the course of a year on a budget of just $6,000, following is proof that imagination could overcome almost any limitation. The film follows an unnamed young writer played by Jeremy Theobald, whose obsession with secretly following strangers through streets of London leads him to the dangers of the charismatic thief Cobb, played by Alex Hoare. Cobb introduces burglary not as a crime of greed but as a psychological exercise, an invasion that reveals who people truly are. As the writer is drawn deeper into the Cobb's manipulative world, reality begins to blur and the audience is pulled tightly into the world noir filled with deception, shifting identities, and a mysterious tale known only as The Blonde. Even if it is his very first feature, Nolan demonstrated extraordinary ability to build suspense through carefully planted revelations. More importantly, Following introduced the filmmaking style that would define Nolan's career. Shot in grainy black and white 16mm film, using mostly handheld camera work and natural light, the movie embraced its low-budget limitations while displaying the remarkable confidence and precision. Its fractured, non-linear narrative challenged audiences to piece together the stories themselves, a storytelling technique that Nolan later perfected in films like Memento, Inception, and of course Interstellar. Though Following earned only modest attention upon its release, it revealed a filmmaker with a single vision, proving, even with almost no money, Nolan possessed the ambition, discipline, and originality to pursue his career. As Christopher Nolan prepared to leave England for Los Angeles in pursuit of a filmmaking career, an idea emerged that would change his life forever. During a cross-country drive with his younger brother Jonathan, the two discussed a story about a man incapable of forming new memories. Jonathan continued developing the idea into a short called Memento Mori, while Christopher transformed the same concept into an entirely original screenplay. The finished script, simply titled Memento, immediately impressed executives at Newmarket Films, who reportedly called it one of the most innovative screenplays they had ever read at the time. With a modest budget of $4.5 million and just 25 days to shoot, Nolan was suddenly given the opportunity every filmmaker dreams of, a chance to prove himself on a much larger scale. At the centre of the film is Leonardo Shelby, portrayed by Guy Pearce after Brad Pitt was forced to leave the project due to scheduling conflicts. Leonard is a former insurance investigator suffering from amnesia, a condition that prevents him from creating new memories. Unable to trust his own mind, he tattoos important facts on his body, takes endless Polaroid photographs, and follows a trail of clues in search of a man he believes murdered his wife. Along the way, he encounters two mysterious figures, Natalie, played by Carrie-Anne Moss, and Teddy, portrayed by Joe Pantoliano. Both claim to be helping Leonard, yet neither can be fully trusted, forcing the audience to question every conversation that they have. Visually, Memento marked a dramatic leap forward for Nolan. Working with acclaimed cinematographer Wally Pfister for the first time, he traded the gritty 16mm photography of the Following for richly textured 35mm film, creating a polished look yet grounded visual style. The film alternates between coloured sequences that unfold in reverse and black and white scenes that move forward through time, allowing two separate timelines to gradually converge. Rather than using its reverse chronological as a gimmick, Nolan designs the structure to submerge viewers in Leonardo's fractured perspective by withholding information and constantly shifting the audience's understanding of events, transforming memories itself into the film's greatest mystery, demanding viewers experience confusion and uncertainty alongside its protagonist. Premiering at the Venice Film Festival in 2000, Memento became an instant sensation. Critics hailed it as one of the most original films of the decade, while audiences embraced its bold storytelling despite industry fears that its unconventional structure would be too confusing for mainstream viewers. The film earned Academy Awards for Best Original Screenplay and Best Film Editing, and won multiple Independent Spirit Awards, and firmly established Christopher Nolan as a new exciting voice in Hollywood. More than just a breakout success, Memento revealed the defining characteristics of Nolan's filmmaking: complex narratives, psychological questions about identity and truth, and an unwavering belief that audiences are willing to think as hard as the characters on screen. It was the film that transformed Christopher Nolan from a promising independent director into one of the cinema's most compelling storytellers.
Chapter 2: A New Voice in Cinema. After the groundbreaking success of Memento, Christopher Nolan suddenly found himself on Hollywood's radar. Among those impressed by his work were filmmaker Steven Soderbergh and actor-director George Clooney, who believed Nolan was the ideal choice to direct a remake of the acclaimed Norwegian thriller Insomnia. The project would become Nolan's first major studio film through Warner Brothers, marking a pivotal moment in his career. For the first time, he stepped behind the camera to direct a screenplay that wasn't entirely his own, although he revised portions of Hilary Sayet's script before production began. Insomnia was largely a work-for-hire assignment. Even so, Nolan found ways to infuse the film with different psychological depth and moral complexities that had defined his earlier independent films. Set beneath the endless daylight of an Alaskan summer, Insomnia follows veteran Los Angeles detective Will Domer, portrayed by Al Pacino, as he investigates the murder of a young girl in the isolated town of Nightmute. Haunted by internal affairs, investigation back home, and tormented by the ruthless midnight sun, Domer's exhaustion steadily erodes his judgment. After accidentally causing the death of his own partner during a botched pursuit, he becomes trapped in a dangerous game of deception while trying to conceal the truth. Standing opposite him is Robin Williams, in one of the most unexpected performances of his career, playing crime novelist Walter Finch with quiet menace and unsettling intelligence, alongside Hilary Swank as determined local detective Ellie Burr. The cast transforms the film into a tense psychological battle where guilt becomes as dangerous as murder itself. With Insomnia, Nolan's filmmaking reached an entirely new level of visual sophistication. Reuniting with cinematographer Wally Pfister, he embraced sweeping 35mm photography that captured the breathtaking wilderness of the British Columbia, standing in for the Alaskan frontier. Vast mountain ranges, dense evergreen forests, and thick rolling fog created a landscape that is both beautiful and deeply unsettling. Nolan combined elegant crane shots, soaring aerial photography, and fluid camera movements with his growing mastery of practical filmmaking. While composer David Julian's haunting orchestral score heightened the film's atmosphere of isolation and psychological decay. Although most conventional in structure than Memento, every frame bears Nolan's unmistakable signature, balancing classical filmmaking with modern tension. Released in 2002, Insomnia proved that Christopher Nolan could revive within the Hollywood studio system without sacrificing his artistic identity. Critics praised its performances, atmosphere, and intelligent direction, while audiences embraced it as one of the rare remakes that honoured and in many ways elevated its source material. More importantly, the film demonstrated that Nolan could successfully command larger budgets, collaborate with Academy Award-winning actors, and deliver a compelling commercial thriller without compromising his vision. Insomnia became the final stepping stone in Nolan's rise from independent filmmaker to major Hollywood director, paving the way for an opportunity that would both redefine his career and the future of superhero cinema. After the success of Memento and Insomnia, Christopher Nolan had established himself as one of Hollywood's most exciting new filmmakers. While developing a biographical film about Howard Hughes, he learnt that Warner Brothers was searching for a director to revive Batman after the disastrous reception of Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin in 1997. Rather than continuing the existing series, Nolan proposed something revolutionary, a complete reboot. Instead of treating Batman as a larger-than-life comic book icon, he envisioned a grounded crime drama that explored how an ordinary man could realistically become an extraordinary symbol. His bold pitch lasted only minutes before Warner Bros. Handed him the keys to one of its most valuable franchises, forever changing the future of superhero cinema. Working alongside screenwriter David S. Goyer, producer Emma Thomas, and production designer Nathan Crowley, Nolan developed the story under an extraordinary level of secrecy. Scripts were read inside of Nolan's own home to prevent leaks, and early drafts circulated under the fake title The Imitation Game. Drawing inspiration from films like Blade Runner and the crime dramas of Michael Mann, Nolan reimagined Gotham City as a believable metropolis plagued by corruption rather than a stylized comic book fantasy. Modelled largely after Chicago, the city became a character in its own right, a sprawling urban landscape where organised crime, political decay, and fear had infected every level of society. To bring his vision to life, Nolan assembled an extraordinary cast led by Christian Bale as Bruce Wayne and Batman. Bale portrayed Batman not as an invincible superhero, but as a deeply traumatized man driven by the childhood murder of his parents. Michael Caine brought warmth and wisdom to Alfred Pennyworth, while Gary Oldman redefined James Gordon as one of Gotham's few honest police officers, and Morgan Freeman transformed Lucius Fox into Bruce Wayne's trusted ally and technological genius, while Liam Neeson delivered a commanding performance as Dunkirk, the mentor whose true identity as Ra's al Ghul ultimately reshapes Bruce's destiny. Completing the ensemble were Cillian Murphy as the terrifying Scarecrow, Katie Holmes as Rachel Dawes, and Tom Wilkinson as crime boss Carmine Falcone, creating one of the strongest casts ever assembled for a superhero film. Unlike previous Batman films, Batman Begins spends nearly half of its runtime exploring Bruce Wayne's transformation before he even wears the cape and cowl. Nolan carefully traces Bruce's journey across the world, from his imprisonment in Asia to his training with the League of Shadows, before returning him to Gotham to confront the city's corruption. The film examines fear as both Batman's greatest weapon and his greatest enemy, showing how Bruce learns to embrace the symbol of the bat in order to inspire hope while striking terror into criminals. Rather than relying on spectacle alone, Nolan grounds every gadget, vehicle, and weapon in believable military technology, making Batman's world feel tangible and authentic. Even the iconic Batmobile was reinvented as the heavily armoured Tumbler, reflecting Nolan's commitment to realism. Visually, Batman Begins represented Nolan's most ambitious production to date, reuniting with the same cinematographer that he used for his previous work. He captured Gotham on 35mm film once again, using deep shadows, heavy rain, towering architecture and practical effects whenever possible, instead of relying heavily on CGI. Nolan favoured real sets, large-scale stunts, and physical action sequences that gave the film a sense of weight rarely seen in blockbuster filmmaking. Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard collaborated on a powerful score that abandoned the traditional superhero fanfare in favour of emotionally driven themes built around rhythm, tension and atmosphere. The result was a film that felt more like a crime epic than a superhero comic book adaptation, setting a new visual and tonal standard for the genre. And when it was released, in the summer of 2005, Batman Begins was met with widespread critical acclaim, and earned over $370 million worldwide, restoring Batman's reputation after nearly a decade of uncertainty. More importantly, the film fundamentally changed Hollywood's approach to franchise filmmaking. Nolan proved that superhero films could explore complex ideas about justice, fear, morality, and personal sacrifice, while still delivering breathtaking action and commercial success. The movie popularized the modern concept of the dark and grounded reboot, influencing everything from the James Bond franchise to countless other comic book adaptations that followed it. For Christopher Nolan, Batman Begins was more than a blockbuster. It was the film that transformed him from a respected filmmaker into one of the most influential directors of the 21st century, laying the foundation for a trilogy that would redefine superhero cinema forever. Following the success of Batman Begins, Christopher Nolan returned to a project he had been quietly taking shape for the past few years. Alongside his brother Jonathan Nolan, he had spent nearly half a decade adapting Christopher Priest's novel The Prestige, a story of two rival magicians whose obsession with outdoing one another consumed every aspect of their lives. Priest personally selected the Nolan brothers to adapt his novel, believing Christopher's early work demonstrated the intelligence and originality needed to bring its intricate narrative to the screen. After years of rewriting and refining the screenplay, the final script was completed only days before filming began, reflecting the complexity and ambition behind the project. Set in Victorian London, The Prestige follows the bitter rivalry between Alfred Borden, played by Christian Bale, and Robert Anger, portrayed by Hugh Jackman. What begins as a professional competition gradually transforms into an all-consuming obsession, driving both men to sacrifice their careers, relationships, and even their humanity in pursuit of the perfect illusion. Supporting performances from Michael Caine as the veteran engineer Cutter, Scarlett Johansson as magician's assistant Olivia Winscombe, Rebecca Hall as Borden's wife Sarah, and David Bowie in a memorable turn as inventor Nikola Tesla. God, that's a stacked cast. Added emotional depth and mystery to the story. Each character becomes another piece of an elaborate puzzle, blurring the line between reality, deception, and sacrifice. Visually, The Prestige combined the scale of Nolan's blockbuster filmmaking with the intimacy of his independent roots, reuniting with cinematographer Wally Pfister and production designer Nathan Crowley. Nolan created a richly textured recreation of Victorian London, using natural lighting, practical locations, and warm earth tone colour palettes, rather than relying on elaborate visual effects once again. The film grounds its magic tricks in authentic stagecraft and practical illusion, allowing the audience to experience the same sense of wonder as those watching it from the theatre seats within the story. This commitment to realism reinforces one of Nolan's defining philosophies, that the most convincing illusions are often achieved through practical craftsmanship rather than spectacle alone. Beneath its story of rival magicians, The Prestige serves as one of Christopher Nolan's most personal films. The structure of the movie mirrors three stages of a magic trick: the pledge, the turn, and the prestige, with Nolan building the narrative itself like an elaborate illusion. As the story unfolds through shifting timelines, hidden identities, and carefully planted clues, audiences become participants in the trick, only realizing how they have been misdirected after the final reveal. And upon its release in 2006, The Prestige earned strong reviews and solid box office success once again. But its reputation has only grown over time. Today, it is widely regarded as one of Nolan's finest achievements, a film that perfectly captures his fascination with obsession, sacrifice, and the art of storytelling itself.
Chapter 3: The Rise of a Legend. Following the enormous success of Batman Begins, a sequel was not just expected, it was inevitable. Warner Bros., recognizing the cultural and financial resurgence of the Batman franchise, granted Christopher Nolan an unusual level of creative freedom and time to develop the next installment at his own pace. Rather than rushing into production, Nolan used this period to refine his ideas and sharpen his artistic direction with The Prestige, serving as a deliberate creative interlude. Its successor reaffirmed his reputation as a filmmaker, capable of balancing commercial appeal with complex narrative ambition, effectively clearing the stage for a return to Gotham on his own terms. From the outset, Nolan and his brother Jonathan began shaping a sequel that would significantly expand the moral and thematic scope of the Batman universe. Drawing loose inspiration from the iconic graphic novel such as The Killing Joke and The Long Halloween, they focused on emergence of two of Batman's most defining adversaries, the Joker and Two-Face. While not direct adaptations, these stories provided tonal and structural touchstones that guided the screenplay in a bold creative decision. The filmmakers even removed the word Batman from the title entirely, choosing instead The Dark Knight, a name that emphasized myth, symbolism, and the broad idea of justice over traditional superhero branding. Set roughly 9 months after the events of Batman Begins, The Dark Knight presents Gotham City at a turning point. Batman's presence has helped push organized crime to the brink of collapse, creating space for institutional reform, led by rising District Attorney Harvey Dent, portrayed by Aaron Eckhart. Dent emerges as Gotham's White Knight, a figure who represents hope that justice can be achieved through law rather than vigilantism. At the same time, Bruce Wayne, played once again by Christian Bale, the best Batman, finds himself increasingly buried by the psychological cost of his double life, questioning whether Batman is truly a force for good or an endless cycle of violence. At the emotional core of the film is the complex relationship between Batman, Harvey Dent, and Rachel Dawes, now played by Maggie May Gyllenhaal. Rachel remains the moral anchor of Bruce's life, even as she becomes deeply connected to Dent's idealistic vision of Gotham's future. This triangle of love, duty, and ideology intensifies the film's central conflict between chaos and order, personal desire and public responsibility, as Gotham's fragile progress is threatened by rising criminal unpredictability. The Dark Knight evolves into a tragedy of ideals, ones that push its characters towards irreversible consequences, while redefining what a superhero story can truly be. At its core, The Dark Knight is structured around a single overwhelming idea: chaos as a destabilizing force. The Joker, portrayed by Heath Ledger, is not driven by wealth, revenge, or even ideology. In any traditional sense, his purpose is to expose how fragile order truly is. He operates as an agent of the disruption, probing the moral and structural foundations of Gotham until they begin to crack under pressure. Rather than imposing a clear system of his own, he proves that systems collapse most easily when confronted by something that refuses to play by any rules at all. This philosophy of chaos manifests through a series of scouting psychological experiments inflicted on Gotham citizens. One of the most striking examples occurs when the Joker forces the city into an impossible moral dilemma: reveal Batman's identity or face mass destruction. By withholding key information and setting violent conditions in motion, it turns the city itself into a weapon against itself. The result is not just fear, but moral. Break down ordinary people and pushed into actions they would normally consider unthinkable, illustrating how quickly order dissolves when survival is at stake. The film further develops its themes through the concept of escalation, a principle introduced in Batman Begins and fully realised here. Every action provokes a larger reaction. Batman's presence inspires copycats. Criminals adopt theatrical brutality to compete with him, and law enforcement begins to blur ethical boundaries in repose unprecedented threats. Even Batman himself is forced into increasingly evasive and morally ambitious tactics as he confronts an enemy who cannot be predicted or reasoned with. In this environment, justice becomes less about law and more about reaction, spiraling further away from stability. In this way, The Dark Knight reflects a broader anxiety about systems under pressure, where the distinction between order and disorder becomes increasingly unstable. Released in 2008, the film resonated strongly with the world grappling with questions of security, surveillance, and state power in the post-9/11 era. Through Gotham's descent into moral uncertainty, Nolan constructs a modern myth about how societies respond when confronted with threats that cannot be neatly categorized or controlled. When The Dark Knight arrived in theaters in 2008, it did far more than exceed expectations. It redefined what a superhero film could be. Produced on a budget of $185 million, the film became a global phenomenon, earning more than $1 billion at the box office and shattering records around the world. Its success was fueled by the popularity of Batman, the goodwill created by Batman Begins, Christopher Nolan's growing reputation as a visionary filmmaker, and the unforgettable final performance of Heath Ledger as the Joker, widely regarded as one of the greatest comic book films ever made. The Dark Knight provided that blockbuster entertainment could deliver not only spectacular action, but also rich themes, complex characters, and moral ambiguity. The film's impact reached far beyond the box office. It earned 8 Academy Awards nominations, winning Best Supporting Actor for Heath Ledger and Best Sound Editing, while its omission from the Best Picture category sparked widespread criticism throughout Hollywood. The backlash was so significant that the Academy expanded the Best Picture field from 5 to 10 nominees the following year, forever changing the Oscars. More importantly, The Dark Knight transformed the landscape of modern filmmaking, inspiring a new generation of directors and raising expectations for blockbuster storytelling. For Christopher Nolan, it cemented his status as one of the defining filmmakers of his era, creating a cinematic legacy that continues to influence audience and filmmakers around the world. With the overwhelming success of The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan found himself in an unusual, powerful position within Hollywood. One where creative freedom became not just a possibility, expectation. Rather than immediately moving forward with a third Batman installment, he turned towards a deeply personal idea that had been gestating since his youth. A story rooted in the architecture of dreams. This fascination with non-linear thought, memory, and subjective reality had longer echoed through his earlier work, but here it would become the central foundation of an entirely new cinematic language. The idea for what would become Inception was first pitched to Warner Brothers years earlier, framed as a kind of psychological heist film set within the human mind. Development stretched across nearly a decade, interrupted by Nolan's work on the Batman trilogy. But that long incubation period allowed the concept to evolve far beyond its original form. By the time the finished script arrived in 2009, it had transformed into a vast, intricately layered narrative, merged espionage thriller mechanics with psychological inquiry into dreams, memory, and identity. Its budget, once a potential obstacle, became marginally only because Nolan's proven commercial dominance. At its centre, Inception follows Dunkirk, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, a skilled extractor who enters the subconscious minds of others to steal secrets. Cobb is offered a chance at redemption by Sato, portrayed by Ken Watanabe, in exchange for performing the near impossible act of Inception, planting an idea so deeply within a target's mind that it feels self-generated. This mission brings together a specialized team whose roles mirror the structure of a film production itself. Arthur as a strategist, Aridane as a production designer, Ians as an actor and forgetter, and Sato as the financial banker controlling the project's scale and direction. The ensemble cast extends this layered metaphor, with each character contributing to both the narrative heist and Nolan's broader exploration of storytelling mechanics. Robert Fisher, played by Cillian Murphy, functions as both target and audience surrogate, someone whose internal defenses must be carefully navigated and reshaped for the story to succeed around them. Figures like Michael Caine's Miles and Marion Cotillard's mal-added expression and psychological weight, grounding the film's abstract structure in personal stakes. Through this internal play, Inception becomes not just a heist film, but a reflection on filmmaking itself, where ideas are planned, realities are constructed, and meaning is shaped from within.
Chapter 4: The Darkest Night. With the conclusion of The Dark Knight and the unprecedented cultural force it became, Christopher Nolan found himself in the rare position of being able to conclude his Batman saga on his own terms. Rather than immediately capitalising on momentum, he allowed distance and perspective to shape the final chapter. The result was The Dark Knight Rises, a film conceived not only as a simple sequel, but as a culmination of ideas seeded across Batman Begins and its successor, The Dark Knight. This sense of finality gave the project a different creative weight, less about escalation for its own sake, and more about resolving a thematic structure that had been carefully constructed over nearly a decade. If The Dark Knight was defined by chaos and morality destabilization, then The Dark Knight Rises is defined by exhaustion, physical, ideological, and civic. Gotham is no longer a city at the edge of collapse from its own corruption alone, but one temporarily stabilized by the myth of Harvey Dent, living under a forced peace that masks deeper fractures. Nolan's approach is deliberately maximalist here. Every narrative thread, from institutional collapse to personal redemption, is pushed towards apocalyptic stakes. The city itself becomes the final battleground for the trilogy's long-running question on whether systems are built on fear, chaos, or sacrifice, and if they could ever be truly hold. Structurally, the film continues the escalation principle established in Batman Begins and intensified in The Dark Knight, but it turns that escalation inward as much as outward. Bruce Wayne is no longer the endless adaptive strategist he once was. Instead, he's physically diminished and psychologically isolated, forced to confront the limits of his own myth. This is where Nolan's fascination with endurance and systems reaches its most human form. Batman is treated less as an invincible symbol and more as a failing structure that must be rebuilt or abandoned. Even the antagonistic force embodied by Bane, played by Tom Hardy, becomes less a conventional villain and more a pressure test designed to expose the fragility of Gotham's social contract. In this sense, The Dark Knight Rises also feels like a thematic counterpart to Inception, sharing its interest in layered structures, collapsing realities, and psychological thresholds. Where that earlier film explored the architecture of dreams, this one explores the architecture of collapse of cities, identities, and inherited systems of belief. By the time the narrative reaches its final movement, Nolan is no longer simply closing a superhero trilogy. He is interrogating the sustainability of the entire mythos he constructed. The ending, framed around renewal rather than resolution, reinforces the idea that endings in his work are rarely conclusions so much as transformations into something new. Its box office dominance was widely anticipated long before release, with the marketing campaign positioning The Dark Knight Rises as a major cultural event rather than just a conventional blockbuster. The build-up was intense enough that midnight screenings on July 20th, 2012 drew enormous crowds across the United States alone, turning opening night into something closer to a communal ritual rather than a typical premiere. The scale of anticipation reflected not just the popularity of the Batman franchise, but also the culmination of Christopher Nolan's carefully constructed trilogy as a whole, which had already reshaped expectations for modern studio filmmaking through The Dark Knight and Batman Begins. That sense of cultural occasion was abruptly and tragically disrupted when a mass shooting occurred at a midnight screening in Aurora, Colorado. A gunman, later identified as James Holmes, opened fire inside of the theatre, killing 12 people and injuring 58 others. The event cast an immediate and lasting shadow over the film's release, reframing what had been a moment of collective excitement into one marked by grief and shock. Nolan and his collaborators issued statements expressing profound sorrow, and the incident forced a broader public reflection on the vulnerability of shared spaces like movie theatres. For Nolan, the tragedy struck at the heart of something he had long valued: the cinema as a communal, almost sacred space where audiences gather to experience stories together in darkness. The attack disrupted that idealized notion, introducing a harsh intrusion of real-world violence into what he saw as a shared imaginative refuge. Despite the weight of those circumstances, audiences still turned out in large numbers, and in some cases, the act of attending screening became an assertion of resilience in the face of fear. Commercially, the film nevertheless surged past the billion-dollar mark, securing its place among the highest-grossing films of its time. Critical response remained largely positive, with reviewers praising Nolan's technical precision and the ambition of his conclusion, even when noting the film's density and sprawling structure. In the end, The Dark Knight Rises was widely regarded as a fitting conclusion to the trilogy that began with Batman Begins and reached its creative peak with The Dark Knight. Beyond its financial success and critical debate, the film solidified Nolan's reputation as a filmmaker capable of executing large-scale, conceptually ambitious storytelling within the framework of mainstream cinema, leaving a lasting foundation for his subsequent work. Mankind has always defined itself through movement across continents, oceans, and eventually into the skies. This drive to expand, explore, and settle has shaped not only geography, but also the ways societies imagine themselves. Borders, nations, and cultural divisions emerged as attempts to organize this restless energy, but from a greater distance, especially the perspective offered by space exploration, they dissolve into abstraction. The Earth reveals itself not as a patchwork of competing territories, but as a single fragile system suspended in darkness where the distinctions humans cling to appear far less permanent than they seem from the ground. This shift in perspective is central to Christopher Nolan's Interstellar, a film that frames humanity's survival not as a political or military struggle, but as an existential necessity. Set in a future where environmental collapse has reshaped civilization, the story imagines a world where scientific inquiry and space exploration has been abandoned in favor of immediate survival. Dust storms, failing crops, and shrinking resources reduce humanity's ambitions, forcing it into a narrow and increasingly fragile existence. In this context, the rediscovery of a hidden NASA operation and a possible path beyond Earth becomes not just hope, but obligation. At the heart of the narrative is Cooper, played by Matthew McConaughey, a former pilot turned farmer who is turned back into the world of exploration. His journey is not simply one of physical travel, but of emotional fracture, leaving behind his children in order to secure their future across the stars. This tension between duty and love becomes the film's emotional core, especially as time itself stretches and distorts through relativistic space travel. Years pass on Earth while moments unfold elsewhere, turning personal relationships into something both intermediate and painfully distant, as communication itself begins to transcend conventional boundaries. What elevates Interstellar beyond a traditional science fiction adventure is its attempt to merge cosmic scale with intimate human experience. The film treats space not as an empty void, but as a medium through which profound ideas about time, memory, and connection can be explored. Even abstract concepts like gravity and love are positioned as forces that shape reality in tangible ways. In doing so, the story suggests that exploration is not just about reaching new worlds, but about redefining what it means to remain connected across impossible distances, and what humanity is willing to sacrifice in order to endure. Nolan has often been described as an emotional mathematician, a filmmaker who builds stories around structure, logic, and precision, while still engineering powerful emotional impact. In Interstellar, this approach becomes especially clear through its reliance on scientific concepts and systems of communication, ranging from binary codes and gravitational equations to Morse code and relativistic time differences. Even the film's emotional core is shaped like a puzzle, where survival depends on solving abstract problems involving physics, space travel, and the manipulation of gravity itself. That puzzle box approach extends into every aspect of the film's design and production. Space travel is depicted with an emphasis on functional realism, from carefully engineered suits to spacecraft navigation and fuel conservation strategies that become key narrative challenges. The NASA facilities are designed with the architectural purpose, such as the rotating centrifuge meant to generate artificial gravity and eventually become a habitat in space. Even literacy and poetry are woven into the structure, with repeated references to works like Dylan Thomas's "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night," reinforcing the urgency and emotional stakes of humanity's mission. Ultimately, Interstellar blends its scientific rigor with a more abstract emotional idea that love functions a force beyond physical measurement, transcending time and space. Despite its complexity and occasional divisive reception, the film was widely recognised for its technical ambition, especially its visual effects, which it earned an Academy Award in the category previously associated with landmark works such as 2001: A Space Odyssey. While not universally regarded as flawless, it remains one of the most ambitious and visually striking science fiction films of its era. Christopher Nolan's short documentary Quay reflects both his admiration for handcrafted filmmaking and his desire to champion artists working outside mainstream cinema. Known for his commitment to practical effects and analog techniques, Nolan uses his influence to spotlight the Quay brothers, whose surreal gothic puppet animation stands in stark contrast to conventional Hollywood aesthetics. Shot on 35mm film and presented in a restrained, observational style, the documentary quietly follows the brothers through their workshop, allowing their creative philosophy to speak for themselves rather than without narrative intrusion or stylistic embellishment. Rather than reshaping or dramatizing their work, Quay functions as an intimate portrait of artistic craft, aimed at introducing a wider audience, particularly viewers more familiar with large-scale studio films, to a deeply tactile and experimental form of animation. In doing so, Nolan highlights the value of handmade artistry in an increasingly digital industry, while also revealing more of the personal, creatorial side of his filmmaking identity. The result is a brief but meaningful reflection of his respect for cinematic tradition and his ongoing interest in preserving alternate modes of visual storytelling. Chapter 5: The Master of IMAX. Dunkirk is Christopher Nolan's attempt to portray World War II not through its traditional hero-focused storytelling, but as a collective experience of survival. Set during the real-life evacuation of Allied soldiers from the French coast, the film emphasises how war was not just fought by generals and armies, but endured by ordinary people whose courage often came from fear and desperation idealism. Rather than, instead of romanticising combat, it presents heroism as something immediate, fragmented and deeply human, shaped by the instinct to survive under extreme pressure. The film's structure reflects this idea by abandoning a single protagonist in favour of three interconnected perspectives: land, sea and air, each unfolding over different time frames, but converging on the same historical moment. Nolan draws on a wide range of influences, from classic war cinema to silent film techniques, to create a nearly wordless experience built around tension and visual storytelling. By minimalising exposition and dialogue, he forces the audience into a state of constant urgency, mirroring the confusion and unpredictability faced by those trapped in the evacuation. Stylistically, Dunkirk showcases Nolan's commitment to practical filmmaking and large format cinematography. Shot extensively on IMAX and 65mm film, it blends realism with a tightly controlled visual language that emphasises scale, geography and disorientation. The use of real locations, historical detail and immersive sound design reinforces the feeling of being physically present in the chaos, while also highlighting Nolan's interest in turning technical filmmaking choices into emotional tools. Ultimately, the film reframes war as a shared human condition rather than a sequence of individual triumphs. By reinforcing on endurance, coordination and chance, Nolan transforms a historical retreat into a story about collective resilience under pressure. Dunkirk stands as both a technical achievement and a meditation on courage without glory, showing how survival itself can become a form of quiet heroism. In Dunkirk, that philosophy becomes almost like a documentary. His preference for in-camera effects over CGI isn't just an aesthetic choice, but a structural one, shaping everything from production design to performance. By surrounding himself with real environments, real machinery, and real physical risk, Nolan creates a film grammar where danger is not simulated but materially felt, as if the camera itself is embedded inside the event rather than observing it from safety. This commitment pushes production into an unusual territory, where traditional filmmaking shortcuts are deliberately abandoned in favour of elaborate practical solutions. Crew members blend into scenes as extras. Distant crowds are extended with cardboard stand-ins rather than digital composites, and IMAX cameras are physically mounted onto aircraft to capture authentic aerial movement. Even the simplest shots can become a technical puzzle, resolved through mechanical ingenuity rather than post-production enhancement. The result is an environment where the filmmaking process mirrors the story's own logic. Everything is immediate, precarious, and subject to the constraints of the physical world. In the aerial sequences, especially, this approach produces a visceral intensity that would be difficult to replicate artificially. The camera becomes an active participant, shifting, tilting, and straining with the motion of Spitfires and naval vessels, so that the viewers experience disorientation and momentum rather than merely observing it. What might have been constructed as a polished spectacle instead feels unstable and exposed, reinforcing the film's central emotional register of survival under pressure. Dunkirk demonstrates how Nolan's practical methodology is inseparable from his thematic interests. The same techniques that generate realism can also shape his conception of heroism, stripped down, instinctual and collective rather than mythic or individualized. In this sense, the film stands as a refinement of his craft as much as a departure from his early work. less concerned with elaborate narrative architecture and more focused on immersing the audience in an immediate physical environment of endurance. Christopher Nolan's Tenet, which in my opinion is easily his worst film, arrives at an unusual historical inflection point. Released into the world already shaped by crisis and disruption, arriving in 2020 during the coronavirus pandemic, the film's themes of collapse, instability, and temporal dislocation begin to echo the real-world fragility of global systems, particularly in the sudden shutdown of cinemas and the uncertain future of theatrical exhibition. In this context, Tenet is no longer just a high-concept spy thriller, but also a simplistic attempt to revive the communal experience of moviegoing at a moment where that experience had effectively disintegrated. The pressure surrounding the film was immense. At a production scale exceeding $200 million, Tenet represented one of the most expensive original films ever made, with its financial viability entirely dependent on theatrical performance. Warner Brothers delayed it multiple times in hopes of improved conditions, but ultimately released it into partially reopened cinemas, playing to largely empty auditoriums. As a result, the film became less of a conventional blockbuster rollout and more of an experiment in whether large-scale cinemas could survive under unprecedented global constraints. Despite its commercial underperformance relative to expectations, Tenet reinforced Nolan's reputation as a filmmaker committed to ambitious, structurally complex storytelling, large format spectacle. It demonstrated his continued fascination with time, causability, and perception, while also reflecting a production philosophy grounded in practical filmmaking and immersive physicality. In retrospect, the film stands as both a product of its time and an unintended commentary on it. An intricate time-blending narrative released in a moment where the future of cinema itself felt uncertain and inverted. The next film on Christopher Nolan's list, which happened to be Oppenheimer, sits at the intersection of historical drama and technical audacity, shaped by his long-standing commitment to practical filmmaking, despite internet rumours suggesting otherwise. Nolan did not and could not recreate a nuclear detonation. What audiences see is the result of carefully engineered physical effects rather than any real-time atomic blast. For the Trinity test sequence, his team relied on controlled explosions using TNT, gasoline, magnesium, and aluminium powders designed to invoke the scale and volatility of nuclear fission without crossing into the realm of the impossible. In keeping with his reputation, cemented by feats like staging a real aircraft crash for Tenet, Nolan again prioritized physical reality over digital simulation, pushing his collaborators to approximate the unimaginable through tangible means. That philosophy extended across the entire production, particularly in Nolan's collaboration with visual effects supervisor Andrew Jackson and special effects teams working in tandem. Rather than treating visual effects as a post-production layer, Nolan integrated them with on-set practical work, encouraging early experimentation and hybrid techniques that could preserve an analog texture even when enhancement was necessary. The Trinity sequence became a focal point of this approach, blending controlled pyrotechnics with subtle digital augmentation to achieve both scientific abstraction and emotional weight. This insistence on analog grounding was also influenced production design at Los Alamos, sounds like a place in GTA, where an entire historical environment was reconstructed in New Mexico to reflect the authenticity and urgency of the Manhattan Project. Behind the camera, Oppenheimer also marked a significant industrial shift, particularly in Nolan's relationship with Hollywood studios and film technology. After years of collaboration with Warner Brothers, Nolan partnered with Universal following disagreements over streaming strategy and theatrical distribution, securing both financial backing and strong commitments to cinema exhibition. This alignment reinforced his identity as one of the industry's most vocal defenders of the theatrical experience. A stance echoed by collaborators emphasized the film's design for cinema scale. At the same time, Nolan continued to attract top-tier talent, with actors like Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, Robert Downey Jr., and others drawn to the project's intensity and secrecy, a hallmark of his production design. Technically, Oppenheimer also pushed a large format filmmaking new territory through its experimental use of 65mm black and white film. Developed specifically for the project in collaboration with Kodak, IMAX, and Panavision. This innovation required re-engineering camera systems and film stock, underscoring Nolan's willingness to reshape infrastructure to serve his artistic vision. Combined with his split perspective visual strategy, colour for Oppenheimer's experience and monochrome for Strauss's experience, the result is a film that is both formally rigorous and emotionally charged. In blending historical subject matter with industrial experimentation, Oppenheimer reinforces Nolan's enduring identity as a filmmaker who treats cinema not just as storytelling, but as a problem of physical reality to be solved. Chapter 6: The Future of Nolan. Which brings us to the year 2026 and Christopher Nolan's upcoming adaptation of Homer's The Odyssey, which represents something close to a creative homecoming rather than a departure. The story, which he first encountered in childhood school performances, has remained embedded in his imagination as a kind of structural DNA. Nolan describes it not only as a single narrative, but as a foundational pattern that contains within it nearly every genre he has worked in: war, heist, science fiction, mythic tragedy, and survival cinema. In that sense, the project feels less like an adaptation and more like an excavation of ideas he has been circling for his entire career. Across his filmography, Nolan's recurring themes map closely onto Odyssean's structure. Films like Batman Begins, Inception, and Interstellar all centre on displaced protagonists navigating complex, often hostile systems in pursuit of return. Whether that home is literal, psychological, or existential, even Oppenheimer frames its central figure through mythic resonance, aligning with Promethean archetypes. Nolan's interest in ancient storytelling structures, combined with his collaboration with producer Emma Thomas, reinforces the sense that The Odyssey has been quietly shaping his narrative instincts long before he formally engaged with the text. The production itself had been conceived as an orderly worthy of its source material, shot across multiple countries including Greece, Morocco, Italy, Iceland, and Scotland. The film emphasises physical filmmaking in extreme environments, echoing the unpredictability and endurance demanded of Odysseus. Massive practical set pieces, including a full-scale Trojan horse built for location shooting, reflect Nolan's continued commitment to tangible spectacle. The production's physical demands, long mountain ascents, harsh weather conditions, and extended location work mirror the episodic hardship structure of Homer's original journey, turning the filmmaking process into a kind of parallel voyage. Technically, the film pushes Nolan's established IMAX obsession into new territory. Working with IMAX Corporation and longtime collaborator Hoyt van Hoytema, he has developed new camera systems capable of recording synchronized live sound, including specialized sound dampening housing that allows unprecedented proximity to actors. These innovations are not just technical feats, but narrative tools, designed to heighten immersion and collapse distance between viewer and performance. The scale of the production has already generated unusual anticipation, with early IMAX bookings reportedly selling out far in advance. Nolan's influences for the project returned repeatedly to cinematic epics that shaped modern visual storytelling. Films such as 2001: A Space Odyssey and Lawrence of Arabia serve as explicit touchstones both for their structural ambition and their treatment of landscape as mythical. Thank you for watching the Filmmakers That Inspire Us. I've been Jordan, you've been you, and I would just like to say that if you've learned something about Christopher Nolan, leave it down in the comments down below. Because throughout this documentary, we've looked at the beaches featured in Dunkirk, the bomb featured in Oppenheimer, and one of the greatest Batman performances seen in superhero cinema. Goodbye, everybody.
Real thrills.